This is Center Stage, putting your firm in the spotlight by highlighting business owners and other industry experts to help take your firm to the next level. Hey everyone, and welcome to Center Stage. I'm your host, John Henson, and this week, talking about something that we haven't really covered on this show yet in the 2.5 or so years that we've been doing it, which I can't believe because it's a big concern, I know, for all firm owners, and that is your cybersecurity, not just your security in general, but definitely your cybersecurity. And one thing I've noticed a lot, especially, in conversations that I've observed and that I've had with a lot of people, there's just this big lack of understanding around what firms should be doing with their cybersecurity, what's actually safe or what's safer than you think it is, and all of that. And so to cover that today, we are joined by Juan Bosacoma from CIO Landing. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. So before we jump in, give us the quick intro, who you are, what is CIO Landing, and what do you do for people?
Yes. So we are the outsourced IT department for small and mid-sized firms. We help companies, whether they have an IT department or not. If they don't, we take care of every aspect that's related to IT, including cybersecurity. And if they do have an IT resource, we supplement with resources that they may not have available.
Got it.
So
awesome. So, just in your experience and what you've seen out there with the firms that you help, who or what is generally the biggest threat to a firm's security?
So there are a number of who's and what affect or are a threat to a firm's security.
Yeah.
The biggest one is really employees, and by that I mean is that people that work for a company have access to information, and if you don't have some sort of rules around how that information is guarded, then they become the subject of the threat. But in general, it's really hackers that understand that situation. They're looking for sensitive information that they can take and sell it or ask money for it. And along with that is those folks getting in there through ransomware attacks and other ways of coming in, of course, to get that information are through phishing attacks, meaning emails that pretend to do or say there's something they are not. Also through seemingly third-party vendors, and of course fraudulent websites and in places where they take you pretending to be something they're not.
Yeah. And so, there's so many different, directions that we can go just off of that. One thing, just to kind of build off website security, I just want to get your thoughts on this in terms of, I hear a lot of people, we design websites for people, and a lot of them, not a lot. I would say we've had a couple of people kind of balk at, us taking care of the hosting. We retain a very high end, host, high end security and all of that, but it comes at a price point. And a lot of people say, well, I can just have my website hosted at GoDaddy for $10 a month and be done with it. Right. What are your thoughts on that? Like, is it reasonable to do that? Or is, what kind of risk do they assume in going with someone like a GoDaddy for web hosting?
So, I mean, the general answer would be yes, that would be okay, provided that you have oversight, provided you are on top of updating the platform that is getting hosted, provided that someone is looking to make sure that someone is not trying to get in there. And the reality today is that that type of cost is not
Yeah.
the total cost of ownership. And that's the piece that
Yeah.
people don't look at. I mean, let's say it's not any different than saying, well, I can read a contract, and yes, I can read English.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you start reading and say, well, I'm not sure what this means, but okay, and then someone takes me to court because I didn't really understand
Yeah.
what that indemnification clause meant. And so there's an equivalent situation with websites. And
Yeah.
I mean, if you're interested, I do have a story of something that
Yeah.
happened to a group that I'm part of. It's an investment club, and we have a website. And one of the things I had mentioned was that, look, we need to spend money to
Mhm.
protect it. And it's like, well, now, let's just spend our $50 a year and we'll be fine.
Yeah.
Well, what happened is it got hacked, and the website was in GoDaddy.
Yeah.
And of course, GoDaddy is just, it's like, here's the ground floor. Now you put your building, and and if you build it with um, just matches, and you put any weight, it's going to collapse, right? But
Right.
I'm giving you the floor.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. It got hacked, and you would go in there, and of course all these things would show up, and someone took over. And so we had to do, wipe it out, and then put the security in place. And so it's very real.
Yeah.
And you're really not saving money. You're actually adding cost if you don't do things right, like anything else
Right.
that we do in life.
Right. Yeah. It's all about that risk mitigation. And so, yeah, I mean, cause I've seen it happen too, cause, GoDaddy doesn't, cover the cost of getting rid of the hacked website or cleaning everything up. Like that still falls on you.
Oh,
And
yes.
so, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just a lot of things there. So another thing that you talked about was email, whether it's, these crazy phishing emails, or I don't like one that I get a lot is somehow they will have the name of someone in our office. Maybe they'll take the owner's name and they'll send an email and they'll make it kind of look like it was from them. And it'll say something like, hey, I've got some things to ask you about. Please respond or whatever. And it's not them. Right. And so
Yeah,
I don't know how that works, but what are some of the things that people need to watch out for and protect themselves against with their email?
sure. At the most basic level, the piece that you need to be aware of is the domain where that website, that email is coming from. And one of the traditional ways of impersonating is by making a web a domain and look like yours or someone that you trade information with.
Yeah.
And the typical things are to replace the letter O with a 0,
Yeah.
or the letter L with the number 1, when at first glance it looks the same. And or maybe add a dot, XYZ at the end. So it could be abc.com.abc.
Yeah.
And then most people will look at it, oh, well, I can, it's a .com.
Yeah.
I trade emails with them.
Yeah.
And so that's at the most basic level. And then the next piece is that gets a little bit more sophisticated, is when the attacker gets in the middle. So they get in the middle between sender and recipient, and they interject, and they inject themselves in the communication.
Yeah.
I mean, for those that want to have a fancy word, is they call man in the middle attack, just
Yeah.
like it sounds.
Yeah.
And so they'll get in there, and then they start collecting information, and eventually add a request. And now there are tools that help you catch those sort of situations.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what are some of those tools? Because I know I think most law firms probably use Outlook 365. Some may use G Suite. What are some of the things that they can implement that can protect them from stuff like that?
Right. So within the Office 365 realm, Microsoft offers some of the advanced protection that you can get for email filtering. You can get other third parties that filter spam and filter viruses and the like. And then another layer is one that it identifies impersonators.
Mm.
So what will happen is when an email comes in, it will recognize that that domain is one that looks like the one you've used, and it will alert you. They say this domain looks like one that you've used,
Yeah.
or and will say this is someone that you have not traded information with in the past. So it brings your level of awareness. It doesn't mean that you can't send emails or correspond with someone you haven't corresponded with, but it brings your awareness level up so that you don't fall prey to that sort of situation. So you've
Yeah.
got those different layers, and it's not just on the incoming side, but on the outgoing side as well. Because
Right.
what can happen is someone can take control of your account and then try to reach someone as you and create damage in that fashion.
Yeah, and one thing that I just thought of, and I know I'm kind of going back to the beginning here, but I think I want to get your opinion on how something like this could even happen in the first place. Like, how does someone get hacked? Like in terms of like, is it one of those things where hackers and malicious sort of viruses and all that are constantly just looking for vulnerabilities, where, or is it just like you just had bad luck and it was just you just got chosen one day, is just completely random that your website or your email ended up getting hacked? Like, how does something like that happen? How does a breach even occur in the first place?
Sure. So there are many angles that an attack can happen.
Yeah.
One scenario is that a someone goes to a website that's infected. It downloads some malicious code,
Hmm.
and that malicious code starts looking at what's in your computer.
Yeah.
And one of the places that we'll look at, aside from files, we'll start looking at your emails. So it starts looking at your emails and it finds out who you trade emails with. So now it grabs that whole list of emails and it exports it.
Yeah.
And then the attacker says, oh, um, I have Joe and Mary and whoever,
Yeah.
and I know they've been corresponding with this person, and then say, okay, let me just start throwing little darts and see what kind of information I get. So they start planting seeds. So they start seeding the ground, and a lot of the process of doing that is automated. So it's not someone necessarily
Yeah.
saying, "Oh, I'm going to get such and such person right now." Is that there are automated tools that have a strategy on how they're going to do their farming,
Yeah.
and so they start collecting information, and I mean, they've written applications that start saying, I'm going to look for this sort of correspondence, and then I'm going to start sending these emails. And that's why oftentimes when you look at email filters, you will see um, the same thing that maybe it's happened a few times because it's all automated.
Right.
So it gets in the middle that way, and then they'll try to get you to click. So the idea is, get broad and then start collecting information. And then start issuing those attacks, let me take you to a certain place. Some of the typical things that, and I'm sure you've seen this,
Yeah.
you'll get an email from, say, PNC Bank. It'll say, oh, you got to change your password,
Yep.
or don't forget to come to your to the portal and look your account, and then they take you to a portal that looks just like the site,
Yeah.
except when you look at the URL, that the web address,
Yeah.
it is just slightly different. Maybe
Yep.
instead of PNC, it'll say PNNC.
Yep.
But at first glance, you don't catch it.
Yep.
Now, mind you, there are tools that will prevent that from taking place, that will grab that. So generally, that's sort of the approach that's taken.
Yeah. And it's just funny because, like, I think, obviously most of our audience is lawyers. Lawyers are known for being very analytical, pretty detail oriented people. And yet I still see stuff like this come through all the time. And, because it's just so easy to let your guard down and just kind of assume that everything is on the up and up. So other than email, there's still a lot of client data, very sensitive, confidential data that firms are in possession of. Kind of the direction that things are going right now, everything's moving to the cloud. I think, a lot of firms, a lot of law firms are still hesitant to do that. Just traditionally, they're just slow to adopt things, like new tech like that. But that is where everything is headed. And I know that a lot of, lawyers have concerns about the security of cloud storage and how vulnerable is it, or how safe is it? Even, whether it's in their CRM or wherever they're storing, sensitive data, what are just some best practices that firm owners should be aware of and implementing to make sure that their client data is secure?
Sure. Yes. So um, it always boils down to some of the basics, and one of them is the passwords that you use, and that is to use unique passwords. And not only do they need to be unique, but they should be fairly complex. Like not just have my wife's name and birth date.
Right.
And so that's one piece. Another piece is for those passwords not to be stored in an Excel file, which I see it all the time. I say, well, let me share my passwords with you. And there's an Excel file and all the passwords show up there.
Yeah.
So it's to use a password management tool that saves that information. The other piece is to use the two-factor authentication, which many banks, for example, today enforce.
Yeah.
Which they'll send you a code, a text to your phone. Now, preferably, you're better off using what's called an authenticator app. So it's an app that matches with your bank or whatever institution or application you're using, and it generates a code when you log in. And if you're wondering, well, but isn't this the same as just getting a text on my phone? In some ways it is, but it isn't. The difference is that for that app to authenticate, generally you have to put a password for it to come up, or you got to use face recognition. And so if that phone were to fall on someone's hand, unless that authentication is there, they would not be able to generate that code. Whereas a text, you're going to be able to see in the clear.
Yeah.
So so those are methods are the ones that would really grab the majority of the issues, which is, saving them in a place that can't be read, and then not just have stickies around the office, or underneath the keyboard that oftentimes you find or in a
Right.
drawer.
Yeah.
Those are generally would be the mechanisms that you should use.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's crazy to think that, like I know for a long time, there was an app called LastPass. I think they've either ceased existence or they got sold or something. I don't know that they're around anymore, but I know we used that for a while. That was a really great thing to make sure that, data was stored. Cause I mean, to your point, like we have our own passwords, but then we also had all of our clients' passwords and stuff on there. And so that was, a bigger risk for us because we had our own data to make sure we took care of, but then also all of these websites and social profiles and all of that for all of our clients. And so yeah, that sort of thing right there is really, really important. So the last thing I want to ask you about, it was one of the first things you mentioned up at the top, talking about how employees are often one of the biggest threats to a firm's security, whether it's on purpose or completely inadvertent, just out of complete ignorance of what they should be doing. So what do you recommend that firm owners do to make sure that their employees are always kind of following the best practices, always really aware of security and making sure that things are going smoothly?
Sure. It really comes down to training, and there are services that you can hire that help you um, understand what are best practices in terms of how you store data, what you should be looking for when some information comes across, or how to make sure that you're not installing just any application in your system, that you have the right type of antivirus, or what kind of architecture you should have at your firm so that you protect the innocent, because
Right.
oftentimes it's just ignorance. So
Yeah.
setting up for those trainings that happen continuously and you get tested, and then put procedures and processes in place so that privilege or access privilege is given minimally,
Yeah.
meaning you only get access to those things that you need to have access. And if you need more, then you give more. So you start with the the most basic, and then gradually you start adding it so that you get protection. So you assume, the worst case, and then by doing that, you get protection in case something were to happen.
Yeah. So the biggest takeaway I think from this is that, even though maybe the cloud or, the how, the viruses get into the system and starts writing all the code and taking all the data, maybe all of that seems really complicated and way above any of our pay grades. The solutions and the ways to keep yourself safe are pretty simple, and it's not really involved really complicated. Just make sure that you have tools in place that are keeping you safe. And I know your group does a lot to help people out and can make sure that people are staying safe. So let people know how they can get in touch with you and learn more about CIO Landing.
Yes. The easiest way is, you can come to our website, which is ciolanding.com, and or you can send me an email, jc@ciolanding, or you can give us a call at 847-868-9253, and we'll be happy to talk about your situation. And if it's not something we can do, we certainly are going to point you in the right direction. Those would be the ways for to reach us.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as a little addition, I was actually talking to your team behind the scenes. They also would love it if you guys went to ciolanding.com/CSA. You guys can get a cybersecurity assessment to your firm, totally free, totally confidential. And so you can go to ciolanding.com/CSA, and I'll have that in the show notes for you all. Highly recommend just, get the security assessment. At the very least, get the peace of mind that you are doing everything correctly. Worst case scenario, you can uncover some opportunities that can help you really, shore up your firm's security. But other than that, I think that's going to do it for us here this week. A lot of good information, as always. Finally glad we got to this topic. I'm really glad I was able to meet, Juan Carlos and your team at ABA Tech Show earlier this year. That's how we got connected. So really enjoyed that. But as for all of you out there, please leave a rating and review wherever you're consuming the show. That's going to do it. Juan Carlos, thank you so much for joining us this week.
John, thank you so much. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening. To learn more, go to spotlightbranding.com/center stage.